So, I want to start with some requests for you. First, if you take a photo of me, please do not put it in Facebook or Instagram. That company is a monstrous surveillance engine. It does surveillance of the people it uses, and it does surveillance of everyone else on the net. If you put a photo of somebody in Facebook, you give that company one more way to do surveillance on that person. We could dispute whether putting the photo of your friend in Facebook is decent treatment of a friend. But if you're not my friend, that doesn't affect me. However, putting a photo of me in Facebook would hurt me, so please don't do that, ever. Second, if you record this talk and you want to distribute copies, please do so solely in the formats that are favorable to free software. That means the OGG formats or WebM. Please not in the MP formats, especially not in Flash, which means not in YouTube, and not in QuickTime or Windows Media Player. And make sure that the distribution site, that normal use of the site, allows people to download the recording without running any non-free JavaScript code, which means not in YouTube. And please put on the recording the Creative Commons No Derivatives license, because this is a presentation of a point of view. So, what is free software? Free software is software that respects the user's freedom and community. Because the English word free has two meanings, I have to explain that it's a matter of freedom, not price. So think of free speech, not free beer. When you're speaking Finnish, please don't use the English word free. Say vapaa, and then it will be clear. When a program is not free, we call it non-free, proprietary, user-subjugating software. Because every non-free program generates a system of unjust power, power of the owner or developer over the users. A non-free program is a system of digital colonization. And like any colonial system, it keeps the victims divided and helpless. In this case, they're divided because they're forbidden to redistribute the software, and they're helpless because they don't have the source code, so they can't change it. They can't even determine independently what it's really doing to them. And very likely it does something nasty. I'll say more about that in a few minutes. So, free software is software that's distributed in the ethical way. Proprietary software is distributed in an unethical way. But what I've said is very vague. It respects the user's freedom and community. Concretely, what does that mean? There are 4 essential freedoms that make the criterion for free software. So a program is free software if it comes with these 4 freedoms. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish, for whatever purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code of the program and change it so the program does your computing the way you wish. Freedom 2 is the freedom to help others, the freedom to make exact copies and distribute them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to contribute to your community. That's the freedom to make copies of your modified versions and distribute them to others when you wish. If a program comes with these 4 freedoms, then it's free software because the social system of its distribution and use is an ethical system that respects the user's freedom and community. If one of these freedoms is missing or insufficient, then the program is proprietary software because it imposes an unethical social system on its users. In order for these freedoms to be adequate, they must apply to all activities in life, including, for instance, business. So if someone says, this program is free software for academic use only, he's mistaken. That's not free software at all. with a limitation like that, the 4 freedoms are not adequate. However, note that these 4 freedoms are not mandatory. You're free to do these things, but you're not required to do these things. Thus, with freedom 0, you're free to run the program as you wish, but it's not required. If you're a masochist, you can run it as you don't wish. You also have the option of not running it. With freedom 1, you're free to study the source code and change it and use your modified version. But it's not required. You also have the option of receiving the executable and running it without looking at anything. And frankly, that's what we usually do, because nobody except a big government has enough resources to study all the source code. You study source code occasionally when you've got a reason to. With freedom 2, you're free to make copies and distribute them to others when you wish, but it's never mandatory. You're never required to distribute a copy to someone. You do it when you wish. And with freedom 3, if you've made a modified version, you're free to make copies of that and distribute them, but it's not required. You can use your modified version privately. That's called private software. And private software is free software in a trivial way. All one users have the 4 freedoms, so it's free software. So you can distribute copies to others, and then you're contributing to the community, but it's not mandatory. So note the difference between private software and proprietary software. If someone has a private program, he's not offering you a copy. Well, it's too bad you can't have a copy of it, but you're not being oppressed. On the other hand, if someone's distributing proprietary software, that means you can have a copy, but under conditions that disrespect your freedom, that trample your freedom. And that's why proprietary software is the injustice we're trying to put an end to. So, as you can see, the difference between free software and proprietary software is not a technical distinction. It's not a question of what features the program has, although it may correlate with that. It's not a question of how the features work. It's not a question of how the code was written, although it may correlate with that. Because those are all technical questions. They're not of paramount ethical importance. Free software is an ethical, social, and political distinction, which is why it's so important. The use in society of a free program is development. Every program embodies knowledge. Leaving already? That was fast. Oh, I guess they're not. That feels bad. Every program embodies knowledge. If it's free software, that knowledge is available for the users to understand. Then they can maintain, adapt, and extend the program. They can also use their knowledge in other ways. But the use of a proprietary program in society is not development because it's dependence. Dependence on one particular entity. That is a social problem. Our goal should be to put an end to the problem. In other words, put an end to the use of that proprietary program. To develop and release a free program is a contribution to society. How much depends on the details. If the program is very useful, it contributes a lot. If it does very little and does it badly, it contributes very little. But at least if it's free software, it's distributed in such a way that it can contribute however much it has to offer. To develop a proprietary program is not a contribution, it's a power grab. In social terms, that program is a trap. If it has attractive features, those are the bait. Their purpose is to attract people to surrender their freedom by becoming users of that program. So, paradoxically, attractive features do not make the proprietary program better. they make it more harmful. The more attractive the bait, the more dangerous the trap. So if you have the choice to either participate in developing and distributing a proprietary program or do nothing at all, you should do nothing at all, because that way you don't do harm. Participating in the proprietary software activity is harm to society. Of course, this is an artificial moral choice. In real life, you probably have other choices besides those two, which might be better than both of them. I hope so. But if it's just a matter of deciding between these two, you should do nothing. Because the goal of the free software movement is that all programs be free so that their users can be free. But what makes these four freedoms essential? Why define free software this way? Each freedom has a reason. Freedom 2, the freedom to distribute exact copies to others when you wish, is essential on fundamental moral grounds. So you can live an upright, ethical life as a good member of your community. If you use a program without freedom 2, you are in danger of falling into a moral dilemma at any moment whenever your good friend says, "That program looks useful, could I have a copy?" In that moment, you will have to choose between two evils. One evil is to give your good friend a copy and violate the license of the program. The other evil is to refuse your good friend a copy and comply with the license of the program. If you are in the dilemma, you ought to choose the lesser evil, which is to give your good friend a copy and violate the license of the program. What makes this the lesser evil? Well, if you can't avoid doing wrong to somebody or other, it's less bad to do the wrong to somebody that deserves it because he has done wrong. We can suppose that your good friend is a good member of your community and normally deserves your cooperation. That's usually the case. By contrast, the owner of this proprietary program has deliberately attacked the social solidarity of your community, which is very bad. So if you must do wrong to your good friend or the owner, do it to the owner. However, being the lesser evil does not mean it's good. It's never good to make an agreement and break it. Not even when the agreement is inherently evil, like this one, and keeping it is worse than breaking it, still breaking it is not good. And if you give your good friend a copy, what will she have? She will have an unauthorized copy of a proprietary program. And that's a rather nasty thing. Almost as nasty as an authorized copy of the same program. It's not nasty because it's unauthorized, it's nasty because it's proprietary. So when you have fully understood this, what should you really do? You should make sure you do not fall into the dilemma. I know two ways. One is don't have any friends. That's the future the proprietary software owners have in mind for you. Instead of friends, you can have Facebook friends. The other way, my way, is don't use that program. Don't have a copy. If you don't have a copy, then you don't have to worry what you would say if your good friend asks for a copy. You just say, I don't have it. Sorry, can't help you. You don't have a dilemma to face. So if someone offers me a program without freedom 2, on the condition that I not share it with you, I say, my conscience does not permit me to accept your conditions, so take your nasty program out of here and get out of my office. That's what you should say also. Reject, on moral grounds, software without freedom 2. Reject also the propaganda terminology of the proprietary developers. Terms like pirate. When they say that people who share are pirates, what they're really saying is that helping other people is the moral equivalent of attacking ships. But morally speaking, that's as wrong as you can get, because attacking ships is very bad, but sharing is good. Morally, they're opposites. So let's not call them by the same word. To make my rejection visible, when people ask me what I think of piracy, I say, attacking ships is very bad. And if they ask me what I think of movie piracy, I say, I like the first Pirates of the Caribbean. So, reject the software that forbids sharing, and also reject the propaganda terminology of the enemy. To use their terminology means you're spreading their propaganda and helping them. So that's the reason for freedom 2, the freedom to redistribute exact copies to others when you wish, essential on basic moral grounds. Freedom 0, the freedom to run the program as you wish, is essential so you can have control of your computing. There are proprietary programs that restrict even the use of the authorized copies. For instance, there's a proprietary program for managing websites whose license forbids using it to publish anything that criticizes the program's developer. In this case, proprietary software literally denies the users their freedom of speech. If you can't even freely use the copy that's there for you to use it, you don't control your computing. So freedom 0 is essential. But it's not enough to control your computing, because that's the freedom to either do or not do the things that the existing code is set up to do. So the owner still controls your computing, not through the license if you have freedom 0, but still through the code itself. Therefore, to control your computing, you need freedom 1, the freedom to study that source code and change it so the program functions for you the way you wish. That way, you make these decisions instead of the program's owner. Now, why do I include so that it does your computing the way you wish, so that it functions for you the way you wish? This is actually a crucial point. Nowadays, there are computers which come with software whose source code is free, but the executable is not, because you can't put your modified version into that machine and have it run. The hardware is malicious. It's designed to check for versions signed by the manufacturer, and other versions refuse to run at all. There are Android products like this. We call those devices tyrants, because they won't let the user run modified versions. So that's why it's crucial to mention in the definition of freedom 1, not just the freedom to study and change the source code, but to then make the program function for you as you wish, to be able to run your version in the machine which came with some other version. Without that, freedom 1 becomes a theoretical thing instead of a practical freedom giving you control over your own life. If you don't have freedom 1, you can't even tell what that program is doing. And very likely it does something nasty. Now, there are many unusual dangers in life. When you go home today, a rock could fall out of the sky and hit you on the head. But it probably won't happen. That's a rare danger. It's possible, but so rare you shouldn't worry about it. Malicious functionalities in proprietary software is not a rare danger. It's the usual case. 30 years ago, it was a rare danger. Now, it has become so common that almost all the users of proprietary software are using known proprietary malware. Malware means software designed to function in a way that hurts the user. So, proprietary software is an injustice, but it's not necessarily malware. But in practice, cases of malware are very common. Let me prove my claim with a list of examples. There are three main kinds of malicious functionalities. There's spying on the user, there is restricting the user, also called digital handcuffs or digital restrictions management, DRM, and there are backdoors, which receive commands from someone else to do something to the user without asking the user for permission, and it may be something the user wouldn't like if the user ever found out, but the program may not tell the user either. So, one proprietary package that has all three kinds of malicious functionality that you may have heard of is called Microsoft Windows. There are known surveillance functionalities in Windows. The digital restrictions management, users can see that, they can't hide that. If the program is designed so that it won't let you find any way to tell it to do a certain obvious thing, you can see that. That doesn't make it, that's no excuse for it, it's still malicious, but at least you can tell. The back doors are not so easy to spot, but we know of two back doors in Windows. So Windows is malware. But it's even worse than that. One of the back doors is universal, meaning that Microsoft has the power to install software changes in Windows remotely by using this back door. The users cannot prevent it. So Microsoft can do this without asking permission of the theoretical owner of the computer. I say theoretical owner because in practice, once Windows is running in that computer, Microsoft has owned that computer. So Windows is universal malware. Now we have proof of these features, and you can find it through gnu.org/philosophy/proprietary.html. You'll find references to articles documenting all these malware features functionalities that I'm mentioning here. So Windows is malware, but it's not alone. Mac OS is malware too, because it has DRM also. However, the software of the iThings, Apple's newer monsters, is much, much worse. It has several surveillance functionalities, and it has a known backdoor. But the worst thing of all is the digital handcuffs, which Apple has tightened more than ever before, because Apple designed the system of the iThings as a platform for censorship of applications. Apple has taken control over what applications the users can install. They're not free to install the programs of their choice, as they were in general purpose computers before that. And Apple practices this censorship in an arbitrary way, too, which makes it even nastier. And the users, when they find a way to break this particular set of handcuffs, they call it jailbreaking, which recognizes that these computers are designed to be jails for their users. That was the evil genius of Steve Jobs. He figured out how a way to design computers as jails and make them so shiny and attractive that millions of people would clamor and beg to be jailed. It'll take a long time to undo the harm that Jobs did to the world. We're working on it. Well, we need your help. So, the software, the operating systems for Apple computer products are malware. Flash Player is malware. It has a surveillance functionality that helps websites track users, and it has digital handcuffs. Now, Flash Player is gratis, but it's not free. And this is an important example because it shows that being gratis is not important. All that matters is whether the software is free or not. The fact that Flash Player is gratis means that Adobe does not make users pay to be abused. Angry Birds is malware. It snoops on users and sends geolocation data. The software in the Amazon swindle is malware. I'm talking about Amazon's ebook reader, which through its manner of functioning swindles readers out of the traditional freedoms of readers of books. For instance, there's the freedom to acquire a book anonymously by paying cash, which is the only way I buy books. I never let a bookstore know who I am together with what books I bought, because I don't want their database to record what books I have. But it's impossible to pay cash to Amazon. Amazon makes users identify themselves. So Amazon has a giant database recording which books each user of the swindle has read. And that's not all the snooping they do. In fact, they know which page of which book somebody's looking at any given time. If somebody enters notes, Amazon knows the notes. It's a surveillance machine. But simply knowing what books someone has read is already incompatible with human rights. Then there's the freedom to give the book to somebody else after you read it, or lend it to various people, or sell it to a used bookstore. Amazon abolishes these freedoms with digital handcuffs, and also with contracts that the users are required to agree to, which say that they don't own the books. They only have leased the books for under the conditions that Amazon chooses to impose. Then there's the freedom to keep the book as long as you wish. Amazon abolishes that with a back door. We know about this back door by observation. In 2009, Amazon deleted thousands of copies of a book. Those were they were authorized copies of the book until a certain date. And then Amazon decided that they weren't authorized at all and remotely erased them. This was an Orwellian act. And you know what the book was? It was 1984 by George Orwell. There was a lot of criticism, so Amazon promised it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. If you've read 1984, that's not very comforting, because it presents a totalitarian state whose crimes begin with destroying the books it doesn't like. But don't worry, Amazon didn't keep the promise anyway. The official name of that product is the Kindle. Kindle means to start a fire. I guess the idea is it's designed to virtually burn people's books at a distance. But it will never get in mind, because I will never use such a thing. But keep in mind, that product makes its users antisocial. If you ask a friend to lend you a book, and that person says, "No, I can't lend it to you because I chose to get it in the swindle and therefore I can't lend it to you," that person is being antisocial. This is a product that makes its users into jerks. Don't let it make you a jerk. And above all, warn your friends, because if they don't understand the harm it does, they may start using it not realizing that they're becoming jerks, and they may get attached to it and decide to be jerks. Well, you don't want that to happen, so you should take action in advance by making sure your friends understand this issue so that they won't make the mistake, they won't get started, and won't become jerks. And the last example is that of nearly all portable phones. All portable phones that are digital are computers running software. Now, if it's a smartphone, maybe the user can make some changes in the software. If it's not a smartphone, still the software can be changed, just not by the user. It can be changed by a company remotely. So, it's a computer running software, and that software is malware. First of all, if there's a GPS, it will send the geolocation data on remote command, and the user can't stop it. So this is a snooping functionality. Then there's a universal backdoor, which allows some company to remotely change the software. And that has been used to convert mobile phones into listening devices, which listen all the time and transmit all the time whatever they hear. And you don't have to talk into the microphone for it to listen. It can listen to you from across the room. And if you think you could get some privacy by turning it off, think again. Because it pretends to turn off, but keeps listening and transmitting without showing any sign that it's doing so. It just pretends to be off. The only way to really stop it from listening is to take out all the batteries. But that's not necessarily easy to do. There may be a big battery that you can remove and another little battery that will keep it running for half an hour that you can't remove. Or maybe it won't let you remove any batteries. I wonder why they do that. This is why I don't have a mobile phone. I recognized that mobile phones are portable tracking and surveillance devices. They're Stalin's dream. So, as much as I might find it convenient, I understand it's my duty as a citizen to refuse. It's my duty as a citizen to stick a finger in Big Brother's eye. So, I don't have a mobile phone. So, I've just given you a list of several widely used proprietary software packages, and they're so widely used that almost everyone that uses proprietary software is using one of these at least. And they're malware. So I've proved that almost all users of proprietary software are using proprietary malware. But there are thousands of other proprietary programs I haven't mentioned. And mostly, I don't know whether they're malware or not. It's not easy to find out. We can't check their source code. How do we know if they're malware? This is the point. You can't tell whether a proprietary program is malware unless you're lucky enough to find out that it is malware. For the rest, you don't know, and you can't know. So they demand blind faith. The only way you can trust a program without Freedom 1 is through blind faith. Rational trust with a basis is impossible. Blind faith or nothing. But I'm sure there are some of those programs which don't have malicious functionalities. I don't know which, I can't identify any one, but I'm sure they exist. What can we say about them? Their developers are human, so they make mistakes. Those programs have bugs. The user of a program without Freedom 1 is just as helpless facing an accidental error as facing a deliberate malicious functionality. If you use a program without Freedom 1, you're a prisoner of the code. We, developers of free software, are human too. We also make mistakes. Our free programs have bugs too. But if you find an error in our free code, or anything in the code you don't like, you are free to change it. Because we did not make you our prisoner. We can't be perfect. We can respect your freedom. So, Freedom 1 is essential. But it's not enough. Because that's the freedom to individually study and change the source code, or to do so within one organization. This is not enough because most people in most organizations don't do programming and don't know how. There are lots of other things in life to do. Most people don't want to be programmers. But if you're not a programmer, you can't exercise Freedom 1. But even for programmers like me, Freedom 1's not enough. And the reason is, if you use computers, you probably use thousands of programs, and no human being could possibly personally study and master the code of that many programs, nor personally make all the changes she might want. This is more work than one human being can do. So the only way we can fully exercise control over our computing is by working together, doing it in cooperation. For that we need Freedom 3, which is the freedom to contribute to your community, to distribute copies of your modified versions when you wish. That freedom enables people to work together to make the program do what they want. And then they can offer copies to the public even. And that way, the non-programmer users can get the benefit of their changes, those who want to, because they're not forced to use that version. And thus, we all get the benefit of having control over our software and thus over our computing. Without Freedom 3, yes, each one of us would be free to write the same change. But what a waste that would be to implement this change millions of times. And the people who don't know how to program, they'd be just completely left out. This is not good enough. Freedom 3 is essential also. And the four freedoms together give us democracy. A free program develops democratically under the control of its users, because every user is free to participate in society's decision about the future of this program, which is simply the sum total of what users decide to do with it. By contrast, a proprietary program develops under the sole and total power of its owner and operates as an instrument of that owner's power over the users. No wonder the owners are tempted to put in malicious functionality, because they have power. The power corrupts them. They know how much power they have. They're constantly thinking, what could I get away with doing to the users? What nasty things could I put in that would be somehow profitable? Put in surveillance, well, I could sell that to profilers somehow. Put in digital handcuffs, maybe I will get a nice deal with Hollywood. They always have some selfish motive for the nasty things they do. The point is, this has become standard practice. Thanks. Oh, and where's the little canoe? It was in the box. I asked you to put it aside. It's in the box of stuff.
Okay, I see.
It was in the box of stuff. I hope it didn't wander away.
I ate it.
They don't taste very good. So, I should explain why in free software it's rare to find malicious functionalities. The reason is the users have control of what the program does. If the users spot anything malicious, they can fix it just as they would fix a bug. The users are not under the power of the contributors to the code, and the contributors know this. So we don't feel the same kind of temptation because we don't have the same kind of power. So this means that the users can protect themselves and each other. And since we know the users can protect themselves and each other, and we know that anyone caught putting in something malicious would be roundly hated, it's not a very tempting thing to do. So it's done very rarely. There's no perfect defense known against malware, but this is a pretty good defense. And by contrast, the users of proprietary software are completely defenseless. Because ultimately, with software, there are just two possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. With free software, the users control the program. Freedoms 0 and 1 give each user separately control over the program. With freedoms 2 and 3, any group of users also has collective control over the program. And this is in parallel for all possible groups. Whether the group is 2 users, or a whole country, or the whole world, in parallel, all possible groups can exercise control over the program if they wish. But if the users don't have the 4 freedoms, then they don't fully control the program, which means the program controls the users, and the owner controls the program. This program, therefore, is an instrument of unjust power for the owner over the users. Thus, society has a choice to make. On one side, we have individual freedom, social solidarity, and democracy. On the other, we have the tyranny of the owner over the users. Society must reject proprietary software and choose free software. The ultimate aim of the free software movement is the liberation of cyberspace. We invite you to escape from proprietary software and come live with us in the free world that we have built. I launched the free software movement in 1983 when I announced a plan to develop a complete free software operating system called GNU. I wanted to make it possible to use computers in freedom. That was impossible at the time. The computer won't do anything without an operating system, and all the operating systems for the modern computers of the day were proprietary. If you bought a new computer, to make it do anything, you had to have an operating system installed. It was always proprietary, and there went your freedom. How could I change that? I was one man with little fame and little money, and few people agreed with me. So it didn't look like I could achieve this, and I could achieve any change in this with an ordinary political movement where you protest in the streets and send letters to officials. And besides, I had no experience doing that sort of thing because I was not a political organizer. I was an operating system developer. But as an operating system developer, that meant there was another way I could achieve the goal. All I had to do was develop an operating system. Then, as the author, I could legally make it free software. Then everyone would be able to run computers in freedom by using my system. In other words, I could rescue people from the injustice of proprietary software by doing technical work in my own field. I was aware of the injustice of proprietary software, which most people didn't recognize as an injustice. I had the skills necessary to try to save people from this injustice, and it looked like nobody would try, if not me. That meant I had been elected by circumstances to do this job. It was my duty. It's as if you see somebody drowning and you know how to swim and there's no one else around and it's not Bush. And you have a moral duty to save this person. Well, that statement might be too strong. Good. Perhaps we might identify some other people about whom I should not affirm a moral duty to save them.
Which one?
These are just to hand out. You can put them there and people can take them on the way out.
I can share one sticker per participant, so let's start from here. Take one, each one.
But there are more stickers, right? There were.
Oh, yeah, they are.
Yeah, good.
I was not able to carry them.
Okay. Well, have you been distributing the stickers since the morning? You were
No.
supposed to.
Yes, but I don't try.
Oh, well.
I have only certain.
Well,
limited-
you can just leave them on the table, you know.
Okay. So if
Just put all the stickers on that table and people will take them. The stickers are gratis. You can take as many stickers as you can put to good use. There are several kinds of stickers. You can take all the kinds. The point is to get them put into use. Don't put them on your clothing now, because then they will only last less than 1 day, and that's a waste of a good sticker. Put it in a permanent place where people will see it sometimes. Anyway, this is an adorable GNU that needs a home. So who might, perhaps I shouldn't say you have a duty to save. Well, there are Bush's torturers, and then there are the people who, like Obama, who protect Bush's torturers, and who knows how many more. Fortunately, I don't need to resolve these questions because I don't know how to swim. But in the situation that really arose in my life, the work to be done was not swimming. It was writing lots of code, and I knew how to do that. So I decided to develop an operating system that would be entirely free software. Every piece would be free software. Every line would be free software. It has to be all free software, because if one piece is not free, that takes away users' freedom. And the user's freedom is not entirely respected anymore. So it had to be all free software, but it didn't all have to be written by me. I decided to recruit other people to help write parts of it to get it done sooner. Then I decided to make it a Unix-like operating system and compatible with Unix, meaning the commands would be just like the commands of Unix. Unix was a proprietary operating system with some technical advantages that was popular. By making a Unix, of course, we couldn't use Unix and have freedom. It was proprietary. It was unethical. But by making a Unix-like system, my system would have the same technical advantages, and if it was compatible, all the Unix users would know how to use my system immediately, because it would be used just like using Unix. What they already knew would still work. And then I gave it a name which is a joke. It has to have a name which is a joke. This is part of the hacker spirit. Ha ha, only serious. I was working on a project to give computer users freedom. Now, it's hard to find something more serious than that, but the name still has to be a joke. So it was a tradition in my community, when you're making a program that is inspired by and similar to somehow something that exists, you can give credit by using a name which is a recursive acronym saying that this program is not the other one. So there were many text editors more or less similar called Tico, and then somebody made one and called it Tint. Tint stood for Tint is not Tico, the first recursive acronym. Then I developed the first Emacs text editor, and there were 30 or so imitations of Emacs, and some were called something Emacs, which is pretty clear but not funny. But there was also Fine for Fine is not Emacs, and Sign for Sign is not Emacs, and Ina for Ina is not Emacs, and Mince for Mince is not complete Emacs. And version 2 of Ina was called Zwei, for Zwei was Ina initially. So I decided to make a recursive acronym for something is not Unix, but the obvious 4-letter approach didn't work, because none of those things was a word, at least in the languages I could speak. So, no good. Well, I could make a contraction. I could have something's not Unix, blank NU. So I started trying every initial, ANU, BNU, KNU, DNU, ENU, FNU, GNU. Well, GNU is the most humor-charged word in the English language. That had to be it. You see, the word GNU is used in countless wordplays, because according to the dictionary, the G is silent, and the word is pronounced new. So every time you want to write the word new, instead of spelling it N-E-W, you can spell it G-N-U, and you've got a joke. Perhaps not a very good joke, but there are lots of them. So we have been taught to associate this word with laughter, which makes it the ideal name for any programming project. But when it's the name of our system, and so GNU stands for GNU's not Unix. That's why it's a recursive acronym. But when it's the name of our system, please do not follow the dictionary. Please pronounce it GNU. If you pronounce it according to the dictionary and you say, I'm using the new operating system, you're already mistaken. We've been working on it for 30 years now. We've been running it for 23 years now, 22 years now. It's not new anymore. So it's not the new system, it's the GNU system. There's one other pronunciation error you need to avoid, which sounds like Linux. Strange to say, lots of people, when they talk about the GNU system, pronounce the name Linux. Now, how did this error get to be so widespread? It started from a confusion in 1992. In 1992, we had almost all of the GNU system ready, but one major essential component was missing. That was the kernel. The kernel is the component of the system that allocates the computer's resources to all the other programs. We had started developing a kernel in 1990. The Free Software Foundation hired somebody to write it. I just chose the design. I chose an advanced, elegant design, perhaps too advanced, because it took 6 years to make even a test version. I recently heard that this kernel, the GNU herd, is making progress again, which is nice. But it's a good thing we didn't have to wait for it, because in 1992, Mr. Torvalds, who had written a proprietary kernel called Linux, liberated it. That is, he made it free software. He released it under a free software license. So, at that point, people took Linux, the kernel, and fit it into the last gap in the GNU system, and they made a combination which was basically the GNU system, but also had Linux in it. And that was a complete free operating system. For the first time, you could buy a PC and run it with all free software, using the GNU system plus Linux. But the people who combined the two were not us, because we thought our kernel would be working any day now, and why use a different one? But those people were focused so much on the last component, Linux, that they perceived the whole GNU system, not quite complete GNU system that is, as a minor add-on for Linux. And they started talking about the combination as a Linux system, giving us none of the credit, which was not nice. But other people imitated them, and the error spreads faster than we can teach people that it's not right. So please help us. When you talk about this system, please call it GNU plus Linux or GNU/Linux, because it is the GNU system plus Linux. That's the fair thing to call it. We started it, we developed a bigger piece than any other project ourselves, and so it's fair that we should get equal mention. But the reason why this is important is there's more at stake here than credit. Your freedom is at stake, indirectly, of course, because directly the name doesn't change the thing. But the words you choose determine the message you communicate to others, which influences their thoughts, which then guide their actions. So it makes a difference which words you use. If you called roses onions, that wouldn't immediately change the roses, but it would get cooks confused. And in the long term, it might change the roses. They might breed roses that taste and smell like onions to satisfy the confused cooks. It makes a difference which words you use. Since 1983, the name GNU has been associated with ideas of freedom. The name Linux is associated with different ideas, with the ideas of Mr. Torvalds. And what are they? Well, he doesn't support the free software movement. He doesn't believe you deserve to control your computing. He doesn't believe he deserves to control his computing. He says he's happy using proprietary software as long as it's powerful and reliable. So he has different values, which at least in the field of computing do not include freedom. And he's entitled to his views. But he's not entitled to cite our work as if it were his work and use it as a platform for him to oppose the ideas that motivated this work. And that's exactly what he does when people attribute our work to him. The people who love the GNU system and think it's Linux believe it comes from Mr. Torvalds. It was all started by him in 1991, which was around 7 years after we really started it. And they attribute it to his views. So they adopt his views and they don't even consider ours. And that really hampers our campaign for freedom, because it hampers us from teaching people to demand freedom for themselves. You see, freedom is frequently threatened. To keep it, you have to defend it. But in order to defend freedom, you have to value it. And in order to value freedom, you have to understand the idea first. Now, in other areas of life, the debate about human rights has gone on for decades or centuries. Enough time to reach conclusions about the human rights we all deserve and spread them around the world to serve as a basis for defending human rights. Now, it's still difficult. Finland is plagued by censorship imposed on the internet. Finland even censors journalism about the censorship that Finland does. And there's a proposal now to track all car travel in Finland. A totally evil proposal. And why do they say they want to do this? They want to make sure that efficient cars, which burn very little gasoline, pay just as much road tax as the gas guzzlers. Isn't that stupid? Don't we want the gas guzzlers to pay more? That'll give people more of an incentive to buy efficient cars, right? You'd think that that's what every country would want. Maybe these ministers are working in a deal with the fossil fuel companies to make sure that people don't have an incentive to get efficient cars. Who knows? That's true. That's certainly true in the US and the UK and Canada and Australia. Maybe here too. So, in Finland, you've got a big fight on your hands to maintain the other human rights. But at least people have come to think about rejection of censorship and rejection of massive surveillance. And you could have just become part of the Soviet Union if you wanted that. But this is more surveillance than Stalin was ever able to do. But computing is a new area of life. It's less than years since most people, even in a few countries, started using computing. And in other countries, much less, or they haven't even started. So, that's not a long time to have the debate about what human rights a person deserves in using a program. But in fact, the debate never started, because just about everyone started doing computing with proprietary software, surrounded by other users of proprietary software, and that was the only possibility they knew about. So they took for granted that proprietary software was legitimate, which means that they effectively let the proprietary software owners dictate the answer to the question, what human rights do you deserve in using a program? And the answer they dictated was essentially none at all. They can impose any conditions they like, and the users can only take it or leave it, which doesn't do the users much good if all the programs impose the same conditions. So who's trying to start this debate? We in the free software movement believe we've identified 4 human rights that the user of a program deserves. They're the 4 freedoms that define free software. All users should have these freedoms. They should never be taken away. But when we try to bring these ideas to the attention of the users, even the users of the GNU system, we encounter 2 big obstacles. First, the users of the GNU system don't know it's the GNU system. They think it's Linux and that it was started by Mr. Torvalds and that it comes from his ideas. So they pay attention to his ideas, and he doesn't talk about freedom. So where are they going to learn to demand freedom? He doesn't even encourage them to think about the question. And when they see our articles where we try to raise these issues, they tend to say to themselves, oh, this is from those GNU extremists. Why should I read this? I'm a Linux user. I admire the pragmatic philosophy of Mr. Torvalds. I won't pay attention. This is ironic, because when they call themselves Linux users, they mean they're using the GNU system plus Linux, but they don't know it. If they knew it, they'd react differently. They'd say, oh, I'm using the GNU plus Linux system, and here are the ideas of the developers of GNU. I had better pay attention and think about this. And then we'd have a chance to convince them that they deserve freedom and they should fight for it. And if we convince more people to fight for it, we have a better chance of winning for all of us. We can all lose our freedom because they don't care. But there's another obstacle. The term, quote, open source, unquote. Most people don't hear the term free software. They hear our work described with the other term, quote, open source. How did this happen? Well, during the 90s, as free software and GNU/Linux became more popular, there were 2 political camps in the free software community. There was the free software movement, those of us who said this is for the sake of people's freedom, and then there were the people who didn't believe in that, people like Torvalds, but they participated in the community's activities anyway. So there was a debate between the 2 camps. People entering the community could see this debate and they'd find out about the free software movement, and then they might think about the issue of freedom. So to some extent, our software carried our ideas with it. But in 1998, people in the free software community who didn't agree with the free software movement, people in the other camp, coined the term, quote, open source, unquote, so that they could have a way to talk about basically the same software, but without presenting the issue in ethical terms, as a matter of right and wrong. They wanted to avoid that, and they did. They formulated a different discourse. Because they had a different term, they had the chance to formulate a different discourse with different ideas. So they did it completely leaving out the ethical level of the issue. So where we appeal to freedom and community as the values, they appeal to powerful, reliable software as values. Where we say, if you're going to just, a non-free program takes away your freedom, reject it, they say a non-open source program is likely not to work as well. Where we say, if you're going to distribute a program, it's your moral obligation to respect the user's freedom. They say, if you're going to distribute a program, it's in your practical interest to let the users change and redistribute it because they'll make the code quality better. So you see, the biggest difference is at the deepest level, the level of values. But that's the most important level because our future depends on what we value. If we give people to freedom, but they don't value freedom, they will lose it because life gives people lots of opportunities to lose their freedom if they don't care. So it's not enough to make lots of free software and offer it to people. If we had free software to do everything today, we could hand it out and tomorrow all the users could have freedom. But if they didn't value their freedom, would they still have freedom in 5 years? Probably not. So if you want to establish a lasting freedom, it's not enough just to give people freedom. We have to teach people why it's important. And that's exactly what open source deliberately doesn't do. And they've been pretty successful. They hoped that the free software movement would fade away. But it didn't. Because those of us who are determined to campaign for freedom, we've made the effort to keep it alive and keep it growing. We still spread these ideas. Ever since then, 1998, I've dedicated my work to spreading the ideas of free software, which is the part that they choose not to do. But because they're so numerous, lots of people who hear about us hear our work categorized as, quote, open source, unquote, and they think we actually agree with them. And that ruins everything. It doesn't do me any good at all for people to hear about me and my work if they're told that it's open source. In fact, I've seen articles which called me the father of open source. You can imagine how that makes me feel. But I respond with a joke. I write a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my knowledge or consent. Then I explain the ideas of the free software movement and the term free software, which is the main point of the letter. That's the payload. That's what we want to deliver to the users. The understanding of this issue of freedom, which was missing from the article itself. But I started with a joke because, haha, only serious, and because maybe they'll print the letter if it starts with a joke. But I can't do this whole job. There are thousands of other free software activists, but we're not enough to do this job. We need your help. You can help our cause in an extremely effective and efficient way just by saying Vapa ohjelmisto, or free software. But if you're speaking Finnish, you should say it in Finnish. Don't use our ambiguous word when you could use your clear word. And when people talk about using Linux, say, oh, actually you're using the GNU system with Linux. Make sure people know about what we did so that they'll recognize that the system came from a campaign for freedom. See, there are lots of other operating systems that exist or have existed. All the others were developed either for technical motives or for commercial motives. GNU was developed for the sake of your freedom. And we want everyone to know that this system was developed for the sake of freedom. In fact, we have lost our freedom more than once in the free software community for failure to value freedom enough. In 1992, once Linux was liberated, it was possible to buy a PC and use it in freedom by installing gnu+linux. But it wasn't easy. You had to tinker with it. You had to become an expert to get it to run in your machine. So, some people started developing distributions of gnu+linux to make installation easy. That was a useful thing to do. So a few years later, there were several distributions competing in a community where most people didn't think in terms of freedom. And the developers of some distributions added some non-free programs that did jobs there was no free software to do. So then they said, see, our distribution does more. Look at the things you can do. And the users who didn't appreciate the harm that this did to their freedom, they thought it was good. So those distributions gained popularity, and the developers of other distributions looked at that and said, they're gaining because they have those non-free programs. We have to put in non-free programs too so we can compete with them. So over the next few years, all the distributions became non-free. 15 years ago, when people asked me, where can I get this system? I had to tell them, I'm sad to say that I don't know any place I can recommend. There are several distributions, but none of them is entirely free software. None of them is ethically adequate for me to recommend. So we had reached freedom and we'd fallen back because most of the community didn't care about it enough to hold on. Well, I'm happy to say that there are completely free distributions of gnu+linux now. For instance, there is gnu+sense. This is a joke, because it sounds just like my job title. As the head of the GNU project, I am the chief gnu+sense, but it's spelled differently. And there's also T-Scale, and there is Musics, and Parabola, Dragora. Look at gnu.org/distros for a list of free distros. But if you know something about gnu+linux, you know that these are not the well-known popular distros. Those continue to be non-free, which is a real shame. And not just because people install them and they end up someplace other than freedom. They're led to the wrong destination. But it's worse than that. The popular distros have a lot of influence through what they say. And what do you think they say? Do they say, freedom is very important and we don't give it to you? No, of course they won't say that. They won't, whatever they don't give, they're not going to say it's important. They say, we offer you a great user experience. So they change the values to fit, that they promote, to fit what they're doing. So the influence that they have, they don't use it to promote freedom. They don't use it to teach people to think about freedom. And rather, they discourage that. So they make our efforts harder. And of course, they say open source. They don't say free software. They don't want to suggest that people should think about what they're not doing. But then we lost our freedom in another way. In 1992, Torvalds made Linux free software. But nowadays, it's not. At least not all of it. Most of it is still free software. But in some source files of Linux, you will find long tables of numbers. And these tables are really executable programs dressed up as source code. But representing an executable program as a sequence of numbers is not real source code. The real source code of those programs is not available. So they're not free software. In addition, many of them carry licenses that are explicitly non-free. So what happened here? What happened is that later on, Torvalds decided to put these non-free programs into Linux. They're called binary blobs. And they're actually firmware programs. Their purpose is to be downloaded into some piece of hardware to make it function. And those pieces of hardware will not function without that firmware, which is a real problem for our community. But there are two ways to react to it. One way is to recognize it, and the other way is to paper it over. Torvalds' approach is to paper it over. You can't run that hardware in the free world, so what does he do? He makes Linux leave the free world. He puts in these non-free programs, and the hardware appears to work, but the users don't realize that they're running non-free software. They've got non-free software installed in their system. And then there's our approach. Since freedom is what we value, we're not going to distribute those non-free programs or recommend them or suggest installing them or anything. We say, that hardware doesn't work in the free world. And if you don't like that, do reverse engineering and make it work. That's what we need for a real solution. There are actually two ways we can solve the real underlying problem. We have to either convince the manufacturer to start respecting our freedom and at least tell us the specs for the hardware. The manufacturer doesn't have to release a free program. Sure, that would be nice. If the manufacturer wants to be really helpful, the manufacturer can release the free software. But we don't need that much help. We just need to know the specs. Then we can write the free software. The reason we can't write the free software is these manufacturers are sabotaging people. They're saying, here's a product, buy the product, but we won't tell you how to run it. They refuse to tell the purchasers how to run the product they purchased. Instead, they say, here's a non-free program to run it with, and that's all we'll give you. Now, I think that ought to be illegal, but they do it. So there are two possible solutions. One is convince the manufacturer to cooperate, and the other is use reverse engineering to find out the specs. Then we can develop the free software we need. If you want to make the biggest possible technical cooperation, contribution to the free software community, do reverse engineering, figure out the specs of hardware devices. That's an area where we desperately need your help. So please do it. My understanding is that my speech goes on till 3, right?
Sure. Okay.
And then at 3 I have to leave right away, I believe.
About 7.
What?
Yeah.
So there will be some time for questions, though.
Good.
So I urge the university to start teaching classes in reverse engineering. Project classes is what I have in mind, where a group of students will do reverse engineering about some peripheral, figure out something about how to run it, and then publish that. We need that help. But if you want to make the biggest possible contribution of any kind, do it with free software activism. That's really needed. So nowadays you'll find that many websites send you non-free software to run in your browser, and you don't even know that this is happening. But fortunately, we have a way to prevent it. A program called Libre.js, which is an add-on for Firefox. It studies the JavaScript programs that come in web pages to see whether they are free or not. Of course, a JavaScript program can be free or not, like any other program. If it carries a free software license and points to the source, then it's free. Otherwise, it's not free. So Libre.js looks at the code to see if it's either trivial or free. And in those cases, it's allowed to run. But if it's non-trivial and non-free, it's blocked. And the program warns you, this page is trying to run non-trivial, non-free JavaScript code, which is blocked. It does one other thing. It heuristically searches the pages to find where to send a complaint to the webmasters. I'm sure you've noticed that the hardest part of complaining to the webmasters is finding where to send the complaint. But Libre.js does that job for you. So it becomes very quick and easy to send a complaint. And the complaint can be very short. I couldn't use your site because it tried to run non-free JavaScript code. Please fix that. It takes less than a minute. You could send 10 complaints a day and it would take you 10 minutes. So please contribute to our movement this way. We've got to send the webmasters lots of complaints to convince them to fix this problem. Nowadays, there is another way to lose control of your computing. In addition to running non-free programs, there's something called Service as a Software Substitute, or SAS, which means that you do your computing job by entrusting it to somebody else's server. Now, SAS is basically equivalent to running a non-free program, because there are two different ways of doing your own computing job and losing control over the job you're doing. If you do it running non-free software, you've got the program in your own computer, but you don't control what it does. If you do it with SAS, the program is not in your computer, it's in somebody else's server where you can't see it or touch it, so you don't have control over it. Even if it's free software, it's not your copy, so you won't have control over it. The server owner will have control over it. But that doesn't do you any good. Now, for both of these causes of the problem, the remedy is the same. Don't do it. The way to avoid losing control of your computing to non-free software is don't use non-free software. And the way to avoid losing control of your computing to SAS is don't use SAS. SAS is inherently equivalent to running a non-free program. Leaving so soon?
Sorry.
I hope it wasn't something I said.
No, doesn't go.
But SAS is actually worse. I told you that many non-free programs contain snooping functions that transmit data to a server. Well, the user of SAS has to send all the pertinent data to the server first. So it's the same result. The user's data is in a server, and now the server will show it to the NSA or some other government, and to profilers and all sorts of horrible things. Ah, but there's another problem. Remember I told you that some non-free programs have universal backdoors that allow someone the power to remotely change the program and thus change how the user's computing gets done without asking the user for permission to change it. Well, with SAS, the server owner, of course, can install different software in the server and should be free to do so. It's his computer. But when he does so, he changes how the user's computing gets done without asking the user for permission to do so. So SAS is inherently equivalent to running a proprietary program with surveillance functionalities and a universal backdoor. In other words, it's equivalent to proprietary malware. So you've got to refuse to use SAS. Fortunately, for most web services, the issue doesn't even arise. And the reason is, this issue arises when you're doing a job that is your own computing. How do you tell if a job is your own computing? Well, could you imagine doing it in your own computer with no network connection? If so, it's your own computing. It doesn't involve anybody else. So if you have the right program and it's free software, you could do that job and have control over your computing. And you deserve to have that control, because that computing is yours. Of course, there are other kinds of computing activities which involve other people. There are kinds of communication. You can't have full control over a joint activity, and why should you? So this issue doesn't arise for these communication activities. Other ethical issues arise for them, but not this one. So the cases where we have to think about the danger of SAS is for the things, for the computing activities that are your own, that you should have control over, and SAS would take it away. Finally, free software and education. Educational activities, including schools of all levels from nursery school to the university, ethically must teach exclusively free software. This is not a matter of possibly saving money. That is a minor side benefit that may be possible sometimes. This is not about how to make education a little better. This is about how to do good education instead of bad education. Teaching a non-free program is bad education. It is implanting dependence on a particular entity, which schools must never do, because a school has a social mission to educate good citizens of a strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free society. In the field of computing, this means teaching people to use free software and graduating skilled users of free software ready to participate in such a society. Why do some proprietary software owners offer gratis copies to schools? They want to use the schools as instruments to impose dependence on society. It's just like drug dealers that say, here's a gratis needle of this drug. Try it. The first dose is gratis. Once you're dependent, then you have to pay. That's exactly what the proprietary owners want to do with the schools. And can you believe it? Some schools, some teachers say, we have to teach you proprietary software because that's what businesses will expect you to use. Of course, you don't want to work for a business like that. And there are businesses that are not like that, which I hope are the ones you'll work for. But even if there weren't, the fact that businesses have fallen into a trap is no reason for schools to direct their students to keep the businesses in the trap. The businesses are saying it's hard for us to switch to free software because the schools are teaching the students to use proprietary software. And the schools are saying we're teaching the students to use proprietary software because the businesses are using it. So this is an example of social inertia. Each one saying we can't change till the other one does. But the schools have a social mission. The schools have a responsibility to correct this social problem, even if it means going against the social inertia. So anytime a teacher tells you that it's good to teach proprietary software because of the social inertia, now you know the answer. Schools must never implant dependence. But there's a deeper reason for the sake of the education of the best programmers. See, some people have a talent for programming. Typically between 10 and 13 years, they become fascinated with programming, and if they use a program, they want to know, how does it do this? But when these kids ask the teacher, how does it do this? If it's proprietary, the teacher has to say, we're not allowed to know, it's a secret. Thus, education is not allowed. Every program embodies knowledge. If it's a proprietary program, that is knowledge denied to the students. A proprietary program is the enemy of the spirit of education, so it must not be tolerated in a school. But if the program is free, the teacher can explain however much he knows, and then say, give each of these kids a copy of the source code, saying, read it and you'll understand everything. And those kids will read it because they're fascinated and they yearn to understand everything. The teacher can say to them, if you come across any point that you can't figure out by yourself, show it to me and we'll figure it out together. That gives these natural-born programmers the chance to advance towards being good programmers. Because whenever they can't understand something, that means it's badly written. So they have to learn not to write code that way. That's something you learn the hard way. You find something that's hard to understand, and that shows you it's the wrong way to write things. They need to become good programmers. They need to learn to write good, clear code. And the way you learn that is by reading lots of code and writing lots of code. But only free software gives you the chance to read the code of large programs we really use. Then you've got to write lots of code. You've got to write code in large programs. But to do that, you've got to start small. What does it mean to start small in writing code for large programs? It means writing small changes in existing large programs. But only free software gives you the chance to, look, I'm timing myself. I have to leave at 3, right? So, I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional and I've done this many times. So, only free software gives you the chance to write changes, small and then large, in large programs we really use. So any school can give students the chance to master the skill of programming if it's a free software school. But there's an even deeper reason for education. Education and citizenship. Every class has to teach the spirit of goodwill, the habit of helping others. So it must have the rule, students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share it with the rest of the class, including the source code in case someone here wants to learn, because this is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, it's not permitted to bring proprietary software to class unless it's for reverse engineering practice. The school, to set a good example, has to follow its own rule. It has to bring only free software to class and share copies, including source code, with everyone in the class, except for reverse engineering examples. If you are associated with a school, if you are a student, a teacher, an employee, an administrator, or a parent, then it's your responsibility to help organize the campaign to make that school move to free software. And that includes this university, too. There's a group of students that are thinking about how to organize to get classes here to stop requiring them to run non-free software. And they will ask for your support. So, for more information, look at gnu.org. There's also fsf.org, the site of the Free Software Foundation, where you can find various campaigns. Sign our campaigns to support them, please. You can also find resources, and you can become a member of the FSF. We need your support that way too. There's also the Free Software Foundation Europe at fsfe.org, which can also use your support. So now it's time to present my other identity. Of the Church of Emacs. I bless your computer, my child. Emacs started out as an extensible text editor that I had written, which gradually became a way of life for many users as it was extended so much they could do all their computing inside Emacs. And then it became a church with the launch of the news group alt.religion.emacs that you might find amusing to visit. In the Church of Emacs, we have no services, only software. We have a great schism between several rival versions of Emacs. And we also have saints, but fortunately no gods. Instead of gods, we adore the one true editor, Emacs. To be a member of the Church of Emacs, you must pronounce the confession of the faith. You must say, there is no system but GNU, and Linux is one of its kernels. Then if you become a real expert, you can celebrate that with our ceremony, the Fu Bar Mitzvah, in which you chant a portion of our sacred scripture, the system source code. We also have the cult of the Virgin of Emacs, which refers to anyone who has never used Emacs. And according to the Church of Emacs, offering the opportunity to lose Emacs virginity is a blessed act. We also have the Emacs pilgrimage, which consists of invoking all the commands of Emacs in alphabetical order. There is a Tibetan sect that claims that it's sufficient to do this automatically under the control of the script. Tibetans are that way. But the mainstream church believes that, and holds that, to gain spiritual merit, you must type them by hand. The Church of Emacs has certain advantages compared with other churches I won't name. For instance, to be a saint in the Church of Emacs does not require celibacy, but it does require living a life of moral purity. You must exorcise whatever evil proprietary operating systems have possessed computers under your control or set up for your regular use, and then install a wholly free operating system, and then only use and install free software with and on the system. If you make this vow and you live by it, then you too will be a saint, and you'll have the right to wear a halo, if you can find one, because they don't make them anymore. There is a traditional rivalry between Emacs and the other editor, VI. So people sometimes ask whether it is a sin, according to the Church of Emacs, to use VI. It's true that VI is the editor of the beast. But using a free implementation of VI is not a sin, it's a penance. People sometimes ask whether my Halo is really an old computer disk. This is no computer disk, this is my Halo. But it was a computer disk in a previous life. Thank you. This is an adorable GNU that needs a home, so I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. If you buy it, I can sign the card for you. If you have a penguin at home, you need a GNU for your penguin, because as we all know, a penguin can hardly function without a GNU. We can accept payment in cash or with a credit card if it can make international purchases by phone. When you make a bid, please wave your arm and shout the amount so I can hear you. If you whisper it, I may not even notice you. So that doesn't work. And, no, I'm going to start this. I got 20. Do I get 25?
50.
How much?
50.
I got 50. Do I get 55?
55.
I got 55. Do I get 60? I got 55. How much?
60.
I've got 60. Do I get 65? I've got 60. Do I get 65 for this adorable?
65.
I've got 65. Do I get 70? I've got 65. Do I get 70 for this adorable GNU? Do I get 70 to the Free Software Foundation to defend your freedom? It's not supposed to be gratis. Do I get 70 for this adorable? How much?
70.
Who's speaking? 70. I've got 70. Do I get 75?
75.
I've got 75. Do I get 80? Do I get 80 for this adorable that needs a home? Do I get 80 to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom? Do I get 80? Last chance to bid 80 or more. Last chance to bid 80 or more. Going. Sold for 75. To pay. Okay, good. Come now and buy. Meanwhile, I can take questions. I urge those who wish to ask questions to please come down here and ask using the microphone here. I'm not going to have microphones carried up there. It'll take too long. Come down here to ask, please. Yep. Thank you. At the end.
Some more questions.
Can that be turned on? One of those microphones can... Others who want to ask, please come down now and make a queue. We've got no time, so we've got to hurry.
Okay. Can you sing us the freedom song?
No, that'll take too long, sorry. Listen to a recording, sorry. That would take too long and wouldn't give you useful
Can you
information.
sign my book after the speech?
I don't know if there's time. I don't know if there'll be time. It depends how many people want that. Other questions? Meanwhile, if you're leaving, they're selling FSF merchandise out there. If you want to ask a question, please come down now and ask. Come down now and make a queue.
Thanks for the talk.
Much more entertaining than the previous time. Thank you very much. One thing I've been thinking about is that the whole concept of freedom is very, shall we say, Western-minded. And when it comes to,
So what?
well, if we wish to pursue the message to the, for example, Eastern cultures, China and so, we have the problem that personal decisions are not valued as much as in our...
That's what we have to change. Human rights are important in all cultures. The idea that there are cultures where human rights don't matter, that kind of multiculturalism we must reject completely. I'm sorry. I will not give the tiniest bit of value to the idea that in some cultures human rights don't count.
Well, I'm not talking about human rights, but for example, if a Chinese child picks up litter, and he or she is being asked that who has been done this fine act of cleaning, and he or she says that she wasn't it or he wasn't it because it's not appreciated to lift oneself up.
Well, I don't know what I can say about that. We've got to teach people in all countries to value human rights, including digital human rights. And there is a free software movement in China.
Yeah, I know. Thank you for the speech. I'll try to be clear in my voice. This is a more technical question. I would like to know your opinion on WebRTC. That's technology that enables two browsers to communicate.
I don't know anything technically about WebRTC. My main question about it is, does it run with no non-free JavaScript?
It can. It's possible to run it in completely open source. I'm not.
I don't care about open source. I care about free software.
I'm not.
So, and free software. Open source and free software are not equivalent criteria. There are some programs that are open source but not free. They're rare exceptions, but they exist. As a result, if someone says this works entirely with open source software, we don't know for certain whether it works entirely with free software. So it's just not useful as information either. But if WebRTC can work in the free world, I'm happy with it.
Thank you.
I can't hear you.
So how we can stop these proprietary methods? How we can encourage developers to do free software? How they can...
The main thing we can do is first reject proprietary software. Second, talk about the issue of freedom. We have to organize campaigns for freedom, in this field as in other fields. If you're a programmer, you can also write free software. Look at gnu.org/help for suggested ways to help the free software movement. And there are various different ways which involve different kinds of skills.
Yeah, but how developers are supposed to pay...
I can't hear you.
How developers are supposed to pay the bills?
Well, maybe they should get some other job. What they shouldn't, no, something other than programming. Writing proprietary software is unethical. People shouldn't do that, period. That can't be excused. Now, if no one will pay you to write free software and you need money, then you've got to get a job. Maybe you have to be a waiter. At least it's ethical to be a waiter.
So can I, yes, I'd like to thank you. It was a nice presentation. One question I've had on my mind maybe several months is about, you raised the issue about free software movements versus open source movement. And I think what they are saying that open source is more effective. That's true.
Well, but it's not effective. It does a different thing. It has convinced some people to use programs that are free, and it has convinced some people to develop programs that are free, but it totally fails to teach people to value their freedom, because it doesn't even try.
I mean that the mean of production of software.
But that's not all we need. That's not all we need.
Yes, and that's true. But the question relates to that. How do you think about the open source versus free software movement? Because I think there's several risks. I think there's several risks about that open source is becoming a clever form of exploitation, like making people do gratis work for big companies. So how do we...
I have no idea what you're talking about. You're hinting at various things. I don't know what you mean. All I want to say about open source is it fails to raise the important point. And talking about freedom is crucial, and open source fails to do it. When they say it's more effective, that's so vague, it's meaningless. Effective at achieving what goal? You have to say what the goal is before you can judge whether something is effective. Now, I've been looking at this for 15 years, since 1998, and actually 16 now, and I see that it was effective at doing parts of what we need, but failed, and in fact even impeded what we need most.
I'd like to continue a little bit here. What I'm trying to ask is how we prevent that this whole thing is sliding towards open source versus free.
It's very. I don't know if it's sliding. I don't think that's true. It's not worse now than it was 12 years ago. Maybe it's better because a number of us who are free software activists spread the ideas of free software to people who previously had only heard about open source. You can be one of them.
All right, thank you.
Okay, just one tiny happy question after all the serious stuff. So I would just like to hear, what's the last piece of code that you've actually worked on?
I hardly ever write any software nowadays.
Just gospel?
What?
Sorry, just spreading the word only?
Well, also political organizing of other sorts.
Hello, thank you for the speech. It was quite amazing. I'd like to ask about open hardware.
Well, I'd rather call it free hardware designs. I don't like the word open because it's basically suggests don't think in terms of freedom. So free hardware designs are absolutely essential if we can convert hardware designs into hardware. With digital hardware, that's not really feasible now. You can't make a chip, even if you're given a chip design. But that may change in the future. So if it does, then we must demand free hardware designs. Now, there are some kinds of hardware you can make for yourself now with a 3D printer. And for those, for the objects that do a useful job, that is, they're for functional, they're not decorative. Those designs must be free. For the same reasons that software has to be free. In fact, all works that are meant for practical use must be free. But that doesn't apply to artistic works or statements of points of view.
Well, that pretty much answers the question I had in mind, so thank you for that.
I have just one small question. Is GitHub malware?
It's not where, it's a service, it's not a program. Now, I've seen people criticize GitHub, but I never had someone thoroughly investigate it to make a report. So I don't have an opinion about GitHub.
Would you like if someone investigated it and gave you a
It would
report?
be useful. You want to do it?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm qualified.
Well, then don't talk, don't take up time.
Thank you.
Hi. Do you think running software that's compiled by someone else is an acceptable risk, or?
That's a practical question, and you can judge it for yourself. It's not an ethical question.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Well, if the questions are done, I'm glad. It's time for me to sign the GNU and then get out of here.